Ladies and gentlemen, if you can please take your seats, we're about to begin. Distinguished guests and speakers, both in person and joining us virtually, it gives me great pleasure to welcome you all to today's event, The Climate Crisis, a Child Rights Crisis. My name is Isabel. I will be MC for today's event. I'm a member of UNICEF UK's Youth Advisory Board and have been advocating for children, particularly girls' rights, for the past few years. I'm currently studying at university in London, so I'm honoured to have the opportunity to MC at COP held in the UK this year. I'm very excited to be sharing the stage and exploring this topic again with some familiar faces today. Before I tell you a bit more about today's event, I'd like to remind you that we have French and Spanish translation available. Climate change represents a grave intergenerational injustice. Despite being least responsible for this planetary crisis, children are amongst the most vulnerable to its impacts. This is particularly the case for marginalized children facing intersecting forms of discrimination, leading to increased inequality. But children and young people are also key agents of change and have fundamentally transformed the climate movement. Because the climate crisis is so critical to young people and is a matter of intergenerational injustice, young people must have a fair chance to bear witness to and participate in the decisions that will determine our future and the future of our planet. Today, we aim to ensure children and young people take their rightful place at the heart of climate change decisions and ambition. Today, we will hear directly from young people representing the Global South and North as they influence, speak, and partner with decision makers to drive action. We will assess the progress made with respect to children's rights in climate action, including their meaningful participation and inclusion. We will take stock of what has been done and what still must be done urgently. We will recognize partners and governments who are allies to children and young people. These include governments who have committed to the Declaration on Children, Youth, and Climate Action. And finally, we will unite in calling for more governments to commit to the Declaration, but also to move from commitment to clear, urgent action, so that children's rights are at the centre of the climate solutions. I would now like to welcome the Executive Director of the United Nations Children's Fund, Henrietta Fore, to deliver introductory remarks. Executive Director Fore has been the driver of UNICEF's work to ensure that the climate crisis is understood as a child's rights crisis. She has persistently advocated for young people to have true and meaningful roles and their voices to be heard in climate policy and decisions. She has also called for inclusive child and youth-responsive climate policies and action at national and global levels. Welcome, ED Fore.
Well, thank you very much, Isabel, and for your very smart remarks. I want to add to your welcome to everyone. So, distinguished guests, it is a pleasure to welcome you to this very critical COP26 event. It is now abundantly clear that the climate crisis is indeed a child rights crisis. As our Children's Climate Risk Index shows, this is an unprecedented threat to all children and youth. Over 99% of all children are already exposed to at least one climate or environmental shock, and about 1 billion children are at extremely high risk from the impacts of climate change. Young people may be bearing the brunt of this crisis, but they are not passive victims. We have seen so powerfully in recent months how they are mobilizing as agents of change. We've also heard their message. They do not just want to be on the margins of the climate discussions. Rather, they are demanding their right to participate meaningfully in decision-making. They want to be at our side, implementing solutions. Next year will mark 30 years since the UNFCCC was established. Yet in all that time, no COP decision has focused on children and youth. Nationally and globally, children and youth remain largely underrepresented in climate policies and action. Recent UNICEF analysis suggests that just a third of the nationally determined contributions take children's needs and priorities into account. The time has come to heed the calls of young people. We must move on from mouthing words of support to taking action. And that action must include ensuring that children and youth participate in climate-related decisions and in the implementation of the solutions. In very practical terms, this means that children's rights and voices must be reflected and included in the implementation of the Paris Agreement at the national, regional, and global levels. It also means that governments must further enhance efforts to include young people in their official national delegations to the UNFCCC, ensuring that they have a seat at the table. At home, it means that all national governments should ensure that children and young people have their perspectives and their priorities considered by the key institutions responsible for developing and implementing climate change-related policy. And it means ensuring that all young people can learn about and understand the realities of the climate crisis in order to underpin their ability to meaningfully influence policy and to design and implement action. At COP25, we supported young people, and governments to launch the Declaration on Children, Youth, and Climate Action, a comprehensive framework for accelerating child and youth responsive climate action and policies at all levels. Many governments, including in this room, have signed this declaration, and for this, I thank you. But I also ask that you continue to be a powerful group of allies to children and young people. Your efforts in partnership with youth can lead to a significantly enhanced focus on children and youth moving forward in the implementation of the Paris Agreement. A few months ago, I heard from a young man named Nkosi, who lives in Zimbabwe, and he said, "We, the youth, are not the leaders of tomorrow. We are the leaders of today, because tomorrow might never come." I was deeply touched and inspired by his words. It is his tomorrow and the tomorrows of billions of children that are at stake. The only right thing to do is to follow the steer of children and youth, which so far has been largely ignored. I ask you to use your roles to help answer the urgent demands of children and young people. It is an injustice that while almost every child is affected by the climate crisis, so few are able to influence our response. This injustice must be addressed. We must ensure that children and youth can engage meaningfully in these critical processes. So thank you, Isabel. Thank you very much, and I turn the floor back to you.
Thank you, ED4, for your opening statement. I'm now honoured to welcome to the stage two fellow young advocates and representatives from YOUNGO. YOUNGO is the youth constituency of the UNFCCC. It consists of many youth-led organisations, groups, delegations, and individuals working in climate change-related fields. Sahir Rashid Baig from Pakistan is a member of YOUNGO's global coordination team and a committed advocate for the climate, the oceans, gender, and human rights. Kelo Uchendu from Nigeria is the policy co-lead of YOUNGO. He is passionate about building just, equitable, and sustainable systems and has over 4 years of advocacy and activism experience. Welcome, Kelo and Sahir.
Good afternoon, everyone. The theme of today's event is the one that most closely resonates with me. Climate crisis is a child right crisis. I'm privileged to stand here today as a young Pakistani woman with lived experiences of the impact of climate change. I understand the devastating impact that our changing climate can have in the life of marginalized communities and children. What I cannot understand, though, is why this process and our world leaders are taking so long to do something about this devastation. And how much longer must we wait? How many more COPs will we have where the decisions do not include our young people, children, and future generations? How many more COPs do we need to see real commitments from countries to human rights, gender equality, and climate justice? How many more COPs will put the profit of private companies over the well-being of our children and our children's children? As Mary Robinson yesterday rightly said, you cannot negotiate with science. This is about us, our future, our survival. This is about fairness and equality between generations. Next year marks the 30th anniversary to the signing of the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change. In those 30 years, there have never been a decision specifically focused on children, young people, or intergeneration equity. You're leaving us behind. We cannot wait any longer. The countries who have signed the Declaration on Children, Youth, and Climate Action are working on our behalf. Thank you for your leadership. The Declaration gives you a framework to include us in your decision-making on climate action. The time for talking ended long time ago. You must walk the talk. Those who are happy with the current pace of progress clearly won't see their lives threatened by the climate breakdown, but we will. Join the Declaration's champions and make sure we have a safe future. Thank you.
I would like to begin my speech by asking a very important question. Do we owe our children anything? This may come off as a philosophical question, and in fact, in my regional philosophy, there is an answer to this question, an answer that can be found in the way my people name our newborn, Nwabundu. A name when loosely translated to English come off as a child is life. This shows that when we ask the question, do we owe our children anything? In essence, we are asking, do we owe life anything? Climate change threatens the ecosystem services that community depends on, especially in developing countries such as Nigeria, where people are directly dependent on ecosystem services for their livelihood. The devastating impact of climate change has spread across every region in my country, from the erosion and flooding in the southern region to the desertification and drought in the northern region, making it harder for farmers and children to have access to fresh water. I could go on and on listing the disaster caused by extreme weather conditions. However, this affects us all. History has shown that this is not a problem that can wait. This demands urgency. This is because these innocent children contribute less and are most hit by the impact of climate change. Children deserve more protection now than ever. An estimated 1.7 million children die annually due to environmental-related factors. This same climate change threatens their access to health, good air, quality air, food, and quality education. This is the height of injustice. And no child every child deserves access to good health and happiness. The scale of the threat is international and again common to all. It is not a respecter of contributor, and it pays no attention to gender, color, ideology, or religious belief. And this is why we are here today, to address this issue that concerns us all. It goes a long way to reveal our commitment to this fight, and I believe that a net zero future can only be achieved in unison. Only with working with one another shall we make the progress required to meeting the target and addressing the impact of climate change. So there is a strong and conscious need to move from making verbal commitments and promises to taking action that is transparent and inclusive of young people's demands and opinions. While young people are massively impacted, we have had very few opportunities to actually shape, influence, and participate in the policies that are being made to address this issue. And we demand that this finally change. And we need allies in this push. Countries that have signed the declaration committed to enhancing the meaningful participation of children and youth in climate change processes must now need to lead by example and spur others to action. I strongly believe that there is hope. The Declaration on Children, Youth and Climate Action, which is one of YOUNGO's global priority, is indeed an impressive initiative. Interestingly, my beloved country have signed this. I am also particularly delighted that the President of the United Nations General Assembly, His Excellency Abdullah Shahid, embraced this declaration so powerfully in the UN in October and urged all countries to sign this and consider the opportunities this will provide for children and youth-sensitive climate ambition. Therefore, I call on all members to come on board as the journey to youth-inclusive climate governance begins with signing this declaration. I also want to let you know that these are not just my words, but the demands of millions of young people who I have the privilege to represent here today. And I would like to end my speech by once again asking you to reflect deeply on the question, do we owe our children anything? Thank you.
Thank you both for your opening statements. You have really set the tone for today's event in such a powerful way. Thank you again, Sahir and Kello. I would now like to invite Teresa Ribeiro Rodriguez, Third Vice President of the Government of Spain and Minister for Ecological Transition and Demographic Challenge, to the stage, please.
Buenas tardes, queridos amigos, chers amis, dear friends. It is my great pleasure to join you today for something which is very important. I think that we all know that your voice is quite important, and we all know that acting is more important than hearing voices. And this is why we need to deliver, and this is why we need to accelerate, and this is the thing that we deserve to you all. Children and young people, together with groups in different countries facing vulnerability due to climate change, are the strongest voice when we need to pay attention to what we do. You deserve being at the center stage of climate negotiations. I think that for anyone having a public responsibility, you are the most important human beings in the world, the ones we owe to be accountable to. And this is something that needs to be reflected somewhere. And I have been paying attention to the messages that you have sent in these very short minutes that we have been together this morning. It's true that you are not responsible for the root causes of the climate emergency, and yet you will be the ones bearing the brunt of its consequence for a very long time. And it is only fair, climate justice, intergenerational and intragenerational solidarity, that the protection of your interests and your future, the climate security, is put first in these negotiations, but in any action we need to take at home, cooperating in transboundary context, but also working at home. I could say that it is not fair to introduce additional burden to your lives. Why? Why you have to go out to say, to insist, to denounce, and to come back? Why we need to do so? Why we do not act thinking on our children and grandchildren? We have seen the youth climate movement becoming bigger and louder, pressing us governments, and believe me, I insist on that. There is not a single person with a public responsibility that does not want to earn the future and does not pay attention to what youth and children say on how they see their lives. So it has been very powerful during these last years. We saw this at COP25 in Madrid, where youth voices were more present and heard than ever. And we, together with the Chilean presidency, tried to make an effort to turn loudspeakers to you. And this is still something which is needed. This is why we in Spain joined it together with a group of government and youth activists in Madrid, the Declaration on Children, Youth and Climate Action. And since then, there have been many others that have joined this declaration. We need to accelerate inclusive, child and youth-friendly climate policies. And actions at national and global levels need to include this reference, this perspective when being designed. We need to state it once and again, and we need to act once and again. It's not a question of targets. It's not a question of identifying what in the horizon, which is very important. It is a question of pave the way. It is a question of acting every single day to transform the reality we have heritage. We still need you to persevere, and that's also true. I think that it is very true, even if it is not fair, probably, to say this. Youth is an important positive force in these discussions, and it is very powerful when you send this type of messages, genuine requests, your voice, your protest. We need to channel all these thoughts through the negotiations, through the demands, through the day-to-day decisions. And this means that we need to find and use all the existing channels and identify what other channels can be open. You know that. You know that you have a role as citizens, consumers, full of rights, full of voices when defining what you want to power as individuals. A number of countries have already established climate assemblies, youth assemblies, so to ensure that new channels to hear voices, to hear recommendations, to identify how to act and not against what we want to react, have a place, have a scene where we can hear each other. You have occupied the policy space to influence decisions, and I think that this is unfair, as I said, but still needed, because we need to have your voices behind us. You are masters on innovations, in communications, in technology, in engagement, but innovations means also social innovation, new alliance, a new alliance not only between different stakeholders, but also between different people, human beings belonging to different generations. I want to praise the support from UN agencies, but also from CSOs providing support to young people to get their voices being heard. And believe me, I have taken notes on this hopeful expectation, shameful reality. We need a decision on climate justice. We need to express in a very formal and clear manner that climate justice introduces also the intergenerational aspects that deserve concrete places to be heard, concrete places to be part of the decision-making process. Maybe, as we were commenting yesterday in another fora, this message that comes from Greta, what about the Green Deal, the Green Deals with science, and then what about the deal? Where are the social partners to make deals? What is the social contract that we need to build? And the social contract, expecting to have a proper response, deals with the future, deals with the present, deals with you. So thank you so much for being here, for allowing us to have you in our minds, and to allow us to change our mindset, to act more and quicker. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Minister, for your words. We will now move into our panel discussion. We have heard a lot of rhetoric at COP, some even leading to pledges. But how do we transform these current pledges into action and start to think even more expansively with our pledges to ensure young people are able to take their rightful place at the heart of climate change decision-making, policies, and action? To discuss this, I would like to introduce our panel chair and moderator, Her Excellency Mary Robinson, the first female President of Ireland, former UN High Commissioner for Human Rights, Chair of the Elders, and a passionate advocate for climate justice and intergenerational dialogue. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Isabel, and I'm delighted to chair this panel, and we've got to get started really quickly because we've got a really exciting opportunity, because here in Glasgow, there's been quite a lot of discussion about the opportunity of young people to meaningfully participate in the decision-making process. So today's discussion is about giving young people the chance to ask questions of decision-makers, young on this side, decision-makers on this side. And this will be a two-way conversation because the decision makers will also be able to ask questions of the young people. And no matter what their age, each of us will we'll hear and learn from and have an opportunity to express views. And I'll be quite strict. When you're answering a question, no matter whether it's a decision maker or a young person, 3 minutes maximum. You know, I have a big stick here somewhere, can't find it at the moment, but will have if necessary. And I'm going to start by introducing the young. And in the middle is Setiaki Kusu Medeja. She's an indigenous youth activist from Indonesia. Setiaki, put up your hand so everybody knows who you are. Oh, good. Kello, we've already heard from you. Kello Ushendo is a youth activist from Nigeria. And nearest to me is Priyanka Lala. She's a UNICEF youth advocate from Trinidad and Tobago. And actually, we've known each other. You did a blog for the elders on our website, and we met actually the other day with some other young bloggers, Priyanka. And I asked you on that occasion your age, and I was quite surprised because you're tall. You're only 15. Yeah, so good. And on the other side, I'll also start in the middle, if I may, is Mr. Pernell Charles Jr., the Minister of Housing, Urban Renewal, Environment and Climate from Jamaica. Thank you very much for being here, because I know Jamaica's very engaged in the negotiations, but it'll be worth your while. And beyond Pernell is Prince Jaime de Bourbon de Parma, the climate envoy for the Netherlands, and we've been friends, we've met before too. Yes, so good to see you here. And closest to me is Dr. Christopher Belinas Valdez, Director General for Human Rights and Democracy of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Mexico. And you've already been implementing the declaration, and you know, so good for Mexico. Now, I'm going to ask first Priyanka from Trinidad and Tobago, your question for Pernell in the middle there.
Thank you very much, Mr. Charles. We both come from small island developing states which are uniquely and disproportionately affected by the climate crisis. The most vulnerable in our society are particularly impacted. The current trajectory we're on will be catastrophic for our countries. Jamaica's alignment with the Declaration on Children, Youth and Climate Action demonstrates your island's commitment to centering children's rights, perspectives and needs in fighting the climate crisis. So what is your advice to governments like ours? What can we do to fight the climate change, and how can young people be part of the solution?
Pernell?
Thank you. Firstly, very, very proud to see you on the panel, and very grateful for the opportunity to participate in this discussion. And despite the negotiations, this is what's important, because it is our young people that are most vulnerable, and it is our young people that have the most interest and most to gain by ensuring that they continue to be impatient and energized and driving us to see this issue as the most critical issue of all time. For Jamaica and for other small island developing states, climate change is not just a phrase, not just a catchphrase. We are living it. When you discuss economic growth, sustainable development and well-being, Jamaica, for instance, we have more than 80 to 90% of our commercial and residential activities near the coastline. Many of our children go to school, live, play in those spaces that are most greatly impacted by the negative consequences of climate change. So for governments, it is not optional for you to see the rights of our children connected to the important issue of climate change. In Jamaica, we have had the opportunity of benefiting from the partnership with UNICEF. We have advanced the climate landscape analysis for children, which really exposed how grave the situation is in terms of the impact of climate change, specifically on our children who are in the lower socioeconomic bracket. Those who are greatly affected by the floods, by the droughts, those who are adversely affected by the risk associated and attendant from all of those issues that are consequences of climate change, and those who have parents who are also affected, parents who are losing their jobs. And the loss of that job means a loss of funding that would send them to school, send them to learn, send them to become productive. So governments have to understand how to integrate our children and integrate activities and programs and a framework that allows for children to be able to stand up and stand out on these issues. In Jamaica, we have ensured that even my Climate Change Advisory Board has a large portion of young people. We have the Jamaica Climate Change Youth Council that is very active. We have support from the British High Commission. We have environmental clubs in schools, which as a minister, I engage directly. And the ultimate goal, as I wind down, is to make sure that as we speak about climate action, we draw the line that creates a platform for our children to be within the epicenter of all of our decisions.
Okay, Priyanka, are you happy with that answer, or do you want to follow up a little bit?
No, I'm happy with that answer, and I think that it's so important that Minister Charles mentioned including our young people into the conversation and the decision-making as well, and targeting specific groups, looking at, simple things as where they live, and targeting the issues that they face and the challenges they face, and working with them to create solutions.
Great. Okay, next, Kello, it's you from Nigeria. You have a question for Hemi from the Netherlands. Put your question.
All right, thank you. Most young people in most countries have no opportunity to contribute to decision making in climate change, as regards their respective country. And my question to you is, as someone who is from the inside the government and climate change decision making processes, what best practices or solutions can you proffer to us to help improve this situation? How do young people get actively involved, get included in the decision-making processes as regards to climate and ecological crisis in their respective country, but not just in their country, internationally too?
Jamie?
Thank you very much. Can you hear me? Yes, perfect. It's great to be here in the panel and to see these two sides and to have the wise woman in the middle of the elders trying to bridge this span. I see a lot of youth now present in COP, and what I've heard from people that have been in COPs before, it's an increasing trend. So there's more people physically present here. And as a father, I know we need to take care of our young. I've got 2 young daughters, 7 and 5, and they're thinking that we're going to save the world in this COP. I hope we're going to do that. And I see actually a little bit more optimism in this COP. I see a lot of optimism because before we started it, if we add up all the promises out there, it wasn't enough. And then during this COP, there's a momentum upwards, and we're still not there. And we have to see what the formal negotiations, we both are going in and out in these formal negotiations to see. But next to the formal negotiations, we also have all these ambition things, all these pledges going, where not everybody has to, those who want to spoil the process are not there, only the ones who want to do things. And I see the youth very much engaged there. But what we do in the Netherlands is, on a couple of levels, we include youth. We include youth in the Netherlands, those youth representatives that have a following, that actually have not just any youth on the street, but those who really have representing big groups of other young people. We involve them into the national climate policy making. So the national plans, they're part of that. The parliament passed a law, and that's maybe a good or like a motion that was accepted by the government, that the youth representatives can meet twice a year with the climate minister. So there's direct access, and there's twice a year a moment to listen to the youth. So it's not just the plans, but it's regular meetings. And then here at the COP, we got 2 UN youth representatives as part of our delegation. So they sit every morning with us discussing our strategy, what we're going to do. They can come in and out of the negotiation rooms. And I also bring them to my panels. I had a panel on how to green governments and the United Nations system. And I put a very nice Ugandan youth called Pius, you might have met him, but I put him right next to me and I said, why don't you comment on the things we hear? So every now and then he was voicing his opinion, but also making the case about inclusion of young people on panels. So those are 3 levels. And what we've also done as the Netherlands here is to help those youth from other countries who don't have the means to come here, to make it possible financially to join here, from Mexico, from Uganda, Nigeria, and other places, to make it possible for their involvement. Yeah.
Are you happy, Kello, with that? Good, good. Okay, so now, finally, Setiaki from Indonesia, you have a question for Christopher from Mexico. Setiaki.
Thank you very much for the opportunity. As the COP26 has been a good example for the how indigenous communities and other civil societies engage and more broadly. And what do you think or how your government has done at the national levels, and what can the governments do to ensure the multilateral process, or how to ensure the engagement of youth and children from the underrepresented groups to continue or to engage at COP26, because we may be present here at COP, but we still continue to have the restrictions and other obstacles to influence. Thank you very much.
Christopher?
Oh, thank you very much. Can you hear me? Now. Thank you very much, and thank you very much to my colleague, Mary. Thank you for the invitation. I want to tell you a couple of things that the Mexican government is doing in order to secure the participation and the recognition of the rights of indigenous people, and of course, the youth and the child. Firstly, I have to say that we signed up the declaration 2 years ago, and we honor our international commitment. So last year, we actually have a meeting celebrating this, and to see how we can engage more, especially the youth and the children. But I have to tell you that also we have been really active internationally, and we create 2 commissions regarding children and of course boys and girls for fighting all the time, all kind of violence against child, and also the Interinstitutional Commission for attending all the recommendations of for the Convention of the Rights of the Child. This might sound bureaucratic, but it's important because we put every single ministry or every single public institution into work for one single goal, that is attending and of course securing and guaranteeing the rights of the child. Secondly, I have to say that we have included climate education at the subnational level from the really early stage. So basically, children are receiving climate education, not only environment, but climate change education, and how to do it, or how to work towards avoid the adverse effects of climate change. But one of the things I want to continue, last thing, but we include youth in our, but we are taking this even further because they are part of the negotiation team, and actually they got the chance to have a meeting with the Minister of Jamaica, our youth, and we're going to go even further. For the next year, we want to include the voice of the boys and girls, to include in the national position of Mexico to the COP26. And actually, this has been a really nice experience because they have a face-to-face experience with the ministerial facilitation here in the Minister of Jamaica. So we know, and including the delegation delegation, but not only delegation, but also in the negotiation, and they are actually negotiating. We cannot wait for the next generation to find the time for the table. We are facilitating and provide the space in the table now.
Good. And in fact, Christopher, I'm going to give you the first opportunity now to ask a question. I'd like you to ask a question of Priyanka.
Oh, yeah. Priyanka, for real participation to happen, young people must be empowered and invested in true climate education. What can governments do better to improve and expand access to quality of climate education?
Thank you very much for this question. I strongly believe that education is key to building equitable and sustainable communities. And as small island developing states, we are adversely affected by the impact of climate change and the challenges that we face. So we're victims in the Caribbean region, but we are also contributors. We contribute to the CO2 emissions, and we have a large impact on the climate emissions. So a lot of this is because of the limited knowledge on especially mitigation and adaptation, and our young people not having the access to education and not knowing what to do. And a major challenge is also seen in many MDCs as well. And the global knowledge gap is really the access to quality education. And our young people having that disconnect. Many young people are left out of the education system entirely, especially looking at certain groups like young women, young girls, and different cultural and ethnic groups as well. So it's so important that our young people are given the information and the knowledge, but also, most importantly, how to mitigate and adapt to the challenges that they face. And when I think that many young people are being left out of the education system, I really ask myself, will Glasgow be the turning point in the world's history? And a recent study showed that only 59% of the recently submitted NDCs include commitments to the education sector. And findings from more than 100 countries in a UNESCO report showed that 53% of the world's national education curricula make any reference to climate change at all. And fewer than 40% of teachers were confident in teaching about security of climate change. And only 1/3 were confident to explain climate change in their region or locality. So this is quite devastating and quite scary to see that if our educators, our teachers, our mentors, the guidance in our systems are not confident to teach us what is happening on a global level, where does that leave our young people and our future?
Thank you, Priyanka. Fair point indeed. Pernell, I think you have a question for Kello.
Kello, how can we open up our policy making and implementation to make it easier for our youth to participate? And also, how do you think youth engagement and inclusion in climate decisions should look in the future?
All right, thank you very much. I think there are different scenarios works for different circumstances and different countries. But the first step towards meaningful youth inclusion is to have open, honest, and holistic review, of the current youth engagement framework that is being currently implemented in the country. Have open review, and to be able to identify the gaps that currently exist in the current model, and then, work to fix this without bias. And then something else I would like to point out, which is very crucial, is the need to shift from tokenistic youth engagement model towards the empowerment model, recognizing that young people bring, a unique experience, a unique perspective and voice to these policy discussions, to this discussion. And then also they have unique and, special needs too, and making open effort, to accommodate this need, and also to make sure that these voices is represented. One way to do this is having an open governance where young people, either through youth climate assembly, which some countries have, or meaningful processes where youth can actually, articulate the change they want to see happen, and then be able to translate this into a legislative document which can be debated in the National Assembly and then adopted into law. This can also apply to when countries are formulating their NDCs. What we've seen over the years is that countries come up with an NDC and then they they feel the need to engage youth, and then they forward the NDCs to the youth to go through it and give comment. That is not what we want. We want to be able to include youth right from the start of formulating these NDCs. So there should be avenue, there should be platform for youth to contribute to the design of these NDCs from the ground up, and then build it, scale this work.
Okay.
Thank you.
Quickly, Pernell, because we're running short of time. Are you happy with that answer?
I think it's a good answer. It reflects the need to make youth be involved at all the various levels, and to ensure that the discussion is not just, glossy, but that the discussion is real and substantive and sensible. So good to see that that's the reflection. Yeah, thank you.
So Satyaki, do you have a question for, no, sorry, Jamie. Do you have a question for Satyaki? I was getting it wrong.
I do indeed. So, Satyaki, today more countries are signing onto the Declaration on Children, Youth, Climate Action, and the Netherlands has done so as well. And hopefully many more will do so. What would you like to see happen to ensure that this commitment results into real and meaningful change for children around the world?
Thank you very much. Before I answer all these questions, I want to hear from all the attendants here who are mostly elderly, and how many of you can raise your hand if you have children at home, or you are the caregivers from the children. Please raise up your hands. How many of you? Okay. It's okay, only small numbers here actually. What is the interlinkage with the recognitions for the children's right? Of course, I thank you so much. There are already 29 countries so far who already signed the declarations. But what we want to push here is that we continue to advocate this, and we want all member states to also sign these declarations and continue to implement this. Because why? Children has now faced multiple crises, not only climate change. Children need protections. Like, for example, the indigenous children or children living in rural areas. How many of the children worldwide has lost their parents and their caregivers? There are 2 million children worldwide, actually, who has lost this, and they continue to struggling for the futures. And if the future generations continue to struggling from losing their parents or their caregiver because of the pandemic, then we will lose the opportunities for the leadership in the futures, especially in the climate change. What actually we want to see, this is in the worldwide, that children should be not only considered, but also included in the development of the decision-making process. We want children to be heard in every single decision-making process, including the COP26 and the next COPs, not only to be presented, but we need exactly the tables, like the space, the safe space for them. And then all we need is that children are included and they are the actor itself, not only as the object of the actions. That's it, at the nationals, locals, and then international levels. We need children's, we need the futures, and we choose no to extinctions. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Satyaki. Thank you for your passion, which I share, I must say. I think every country should have adopted this declaration. I'm a little bit surprised that the number is relatively small. So I hope, going out of Glasgow, that far more countries will sign, and I encourage those who have signed, the decision makers on this side, will encourage other countries, particularly in their region, in their group. And I do think, at this stage, that every delegation should include at least one, hopefully even more than one, young person with the delegate badge. And then they get into the room. Now, I have met some delegates from Sudan, for example, who are tired because they're negotiating and then they're trying to advocate and they're exhausted. But still, I do think we need more young people, because we've heard you. You have the ideas, you have the passion, you have the understanding. You are growing up in a world which doesn't have a future for you at the moment unless grown-ups make the right decision. It's a hard place to be in, that you have to wait for adults to, take it seriously enough and make the decision. And we need to hear far more from the majority world, which is the young world in our world. That's the majority world. And it's particularly the majority of the developing countries. So I think that delegates should take seriously having their delegations inclusive and inclusive of young voices. And so we're out of time. I was told, in fact, no, actually we're just in time. But I'd like to warmly thank the panelists. This has been fun. I thought it would be. And I think we should have more of these conversations. So let's have them around the halls of Glasgow as well. And Isabella, over to you.
Thank you so much to our dynamic panel for this thought-provoking intergenerational discussion. And thank you again to Mary for moderating. The focus of today's event has been on ensuring young people are able to take their rightful place within climate policy and decisions. Joining us today are representatives of nations who also believe in this goal, who have shown this by signing the Declaration on Children, Youth and Climate Action, and who we as young people can count on as true allies. I am now proud to welcome Sahir back up to announce the signatories.
Thank you, Isabel. During COP25 in Madrid, champion governments and young people from around the world launched the Declaration on Children, Youth and Climate Action in a bid to accelerate inclusive child and youth responsive climate policies and action at local and global levels. The declaration is based on core priorities identified by YOUNGO and children and youth all over the world. It seeks to heighten awareness of the fact that climate crisis is a child rights crisis, and to acknowledge the historic movement of children and young people demanding urgent action that their voices can be heard. A great example is also present there. The declaration has been signed by 29 countries so far, and now we are here to recognize the signatory countries of the Declaration on Children, Youth and Climate Action. Andorra, Bangladesh, Chile, Costa Rica, Federal State of Micronesia, Fiji, Honduras, Hungary, Jamaica, Luxembourg, Malta, Marshall Islands, Mexico, Monaco, Nigeria, Norway, Palau, Panama, Peru, Qatar, Republic of Korea, St. Lucia, Scotland, by the way, just take a pause here, Senegal, Slovenia, Spain, Sweden, the Netherlands, and Uruguay. Now, can I ask you all to join me in giving the signatory countries a round of applause?
Thank you, Sahir. I would now like to invite Ms. Sabra Nordin, Special Envoy for Climate Change of the Maldives government, to the podium to deliver a short statement.
Good afternoon, everyone. You will notice the Maldives was not on that list, but we are working on it. Let me begin by extending my gratitude to the young people present here today. I know how exhausting and frustrating and sometimes rewarding activism can be. and I cannot express my appreciation enough for your passion and determination for climate justice. And thank you to UNICEF for inviting me to speak at this event and for always giving young people and children a platform to amplify their voices. 99% of the Maldives is ocean. Our islands lie just 1.5 meters above sea level. So we really are at the front line of the climate crisis. The 1.2-degree world that we exist in now already brings about more frequent storm surges, soil erosion, and coral bleaching events, all exacerbated by the climate crisis. But even more concerning is that, like many other small island states and vulnerable countries, we have a higher demographic of young people that are currently on the borders of an existential crisis. The decisions we make as policymakers and government bodies have the power to greatly impact their futures. We start by listening to them and ensuring their involvement in decision-making processes. In the run-up to COP, I was very grateful to have had the opportunity to listen and work with some of the Maldivian delegates who attended the Youth for Climate and Conference of Youth events. They brought with them their anxieties, demands, and solutions about their future in a heating world. These demands centered on the need for greater urgency and ambition in cutting carbon emissions, limiting temperature rise to 1.5 degrees, accessing resources, funding for adaptation, transparency, and ensuring just transitions. But there is a great need to institutionalize having young people at the heart of climate action and decision-making, to guarantee young people a seat at the table, and also the technical and financial assistance to get to the table. I'm very appreciative of the work UNICEF is doing in the Maldives in partnership with the government to help us strengthen our own policies. This includes working with the Ministry of Education to incorporate climate change into our national curriculum, and programs with our National Disaster Management Authority to develop teams of first responders. Before Glasgow, in reference to the Paris Agreement, you would have mostly heard about Article 6, adaptation and mitigation. But without education and awareness, it would be even harder to drum up the effort required to achieve the ambition that young people want and deserve. I acknowledge that the Maldives needs to strengthen our policies by listening to and engaging with our young people and reflecting their solutions in our actions. So this is something I hope the Maldives can continue to work on with UNICEF to ensure that children and young people are at the heart of climate action. I've recently been asked what I could say to inspire young people on climate action. I find it to be quite an arrogant question. Young people clearly don't need us to inspire them. They want us to act. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ms. Nordin. I would now like to introduce Lilian Rivera, Minister of Natural Resources and Environment, Honduras.
Buenas tardes, señores representantes de los países amigos y agencias del Sistema de las Naciones Unidas, amigos todos. Las niñas, niños y los jóvenes han desempeñado un papel fundamental en llamar la atención mundial
play an important role in calling for attention to give a further boost to resolve climate change. They are vulnerable to the effects of climate change. This is why they should be represented and listened in a different, unique way, thinking about setting up the right condition for their development, implementing fair, sustainable climate action. This is why Honduras is the signatory of the Declaration of Girls, Boys, Youth and Climate Change, because we are aware of the need to respect, promote and consider the rights of our children in the implementation of the Paris Agreement. Entering as a signatory this declaration makes Honduras an ambitious country to support the youth and the setting up of a coalition of children champions. How having the support of the United Nations agencies and the UNFCCC. I take this opportunity to invite all friend countries to join in this declaration, in this coalition. We should look after a dignified future for our girls, boys, young people vis-à-vis the climate change. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen.
Thank you so much, Ms. Rivera. As we approach the end of today's important session, I would now like to invite Her Excellency, Michelle Bachelet, United Nations High Commissioner for Human Rights, to deliver some closing remarks via video link. Madam High Commissioner, the floor is yours.
Thanks, Isabel, and my thanks also to UNICEF for organizing this discussion of children's rights in the context of climate justice. As we can see everywhere at the COP and around the world, a huge number of children and young people are working for climate justice. With a clarity that many older people should emulate, they grasp that the triple environmental crisis of climate change, pollution, and nature loss is already harming children's rights around the world. It looms as an existential threat to our future and their future. So those who have contributed least to the climate crisis, including indigenous children and children from marginalized communities, are and will be disproportionately affected, as some of the panelists mentioned. And I fully understand the anxiety and anger that many feel. And I'm inspired by how many children and young people are channeling those emotions into powerful, principled action. And we can prevent catastrophic climate change with immediate and ambitious action. And by bravely insisting that states act on their legal obligations to protect human rights, you are stepping up for those solutions to humanity's crisis. I want to thank you very, very deeply. As the Human Rights Council recognized last month, every human being has a fundamental right to live in a clean, healthy, and sustainable environment. The United Nations Committee on the Rights of the Child, that is the guardian of the world's most widely ratified human rights treaty bodies, has also established that states can be held liable for impacts related to climate change that occur outside their borders. Climate action should be guided by the principles of the Convention of the Rights of the Child. They are no discrimination of any kind, every child's right to life, survival, and development. The best interest of the child must be at the core of the policies, and children's right to participate meaningfully in decisions that affect them. Every one of you has a right to raise your voice and contribute to reforming the policies and laws that impact your human rights. And government must empower children and youth through education, access to information, and access to justice to enable your exercise of this right. We at the UN are committed to working with states to protect the space for civic freedoms and to advance climate justice for the children and young people of today and tomorrow. Working together under the Secretary General's call to action for human rights, every UN organization has committed to promoting the right of children, youth, and future generations to a healthy environment and their meaningful participation in decision-making at all levels. We need you to participate in saving our planet and people. And I applaud the governments here today who have recognized this by signing on to the Declaration on Children, Youth, and Climate Action, which my office has supported since its inception. I urge them to ensure that it is implemented in their concrete actions. So thank you for stepping up to advance human rights-based climate action. We at the UN Human Rights Office stand with you. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much for the powerful closing statement, High Commissioner Bachelet. We have come to the end of our time together, and I would like to once again thank our incredible speakers. I would also like to thank all of you for joining us here in Glasgow and virtually. I encourage you all to be champions of child and youth participation in climate dialogues. To all our government representatives, I encourage you to continue to sign and implement the Declaration on Children, Youth, and Climate Action. I would now like to invite the Minister or Head of Delegation of the signatory countries to the stage for a photograph. Can I invite Her Excellency Mary Robinson to join also? Please can everyone keep their masks on as well? Thank you.